This is Shanghai, the historic port on the Yangtze River, China's greatest city. I had arranged to meet the American author James Bradley, whose latest best-selling book, The China Mirage, reveals an extraordinary hidden history of American power and modern China.
It was almost illegal for someone like me to know a Chinese for almost all of American history. The Chinese came to America to mine gold and build the railroads, and Americans decided we didn't like the competition. So in 1882, we had the Chinese Exclusion Acts, which kept the Chinese out of the United States for about 100 years. So you have the largest population in the world that can't come to the United States. So at just the point we're putting up the Statue of Liberty saying we welcome everybody, we were erecting a wall saying we welcome everybody except those Chinese.
Fear of a rising China today is the latest chapter in a history of propaganda that presented the Chinese as uncouth and infantile. To Western popular and political culture, the Chinese became the yellow peril, and racial stereotypes bore the constant theme of fear and threat.
Boris Karloff as the evil Fu Manchu, his passion for power twisting his brilliant mind as he revels in the horrors of human sacrifice and torture. Behind the mask of Fu Manchu.
This caricature of an entire people concealed another agenda: opium. For the American elite in the 19th century, China was a goldmine of drugs.
Warren Delano, the grandfather of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, was the American opium king of China. He was the biggest American opium dealer, second to the British. He welcomed the first American ship into China to help out with the opium wars. Much of the east coast of America, Columbia, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, were born from opium money. The American Industrial Revolution was funded by huge pools of money. Where did this come from? It came from illegal drugs in the biggest market in the world, China.
Let me get this right. The grandfather of arguably the most liberal president, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, was a drug runner.
Yes, sir. Franklin Delano Roosevelt never made much money in his life. He had public service jobs that were very lowly paid, but he had yachts, he had summer homes, he had mansions in New York City. The kids went to private schools. He inherited a fortune from Warren Delano, his father, who was the American opium king of China. If you scratch anyone with the name Forbes in their name, John Forbes Carey, Secretary of State John Forbes Carey.
That's the present Secretary of State.
Yes, sir. You'll find opium money. His great-grandfather was an opium dealer. How big was opium money? Opium money built the first industrial city in the United States, Lowell, Massachusetts. It built the first 5 railroads in the United States. Opium money all over the East Coast, but it wasn't talked about. It was called the China trade. And if you go to various museums, you can see teas and silks exhibited, and they keep quiet about all that big opium money.
In the scramble to get opium money, China was invaded and colonized by Britain and the other imperial powers. Foreign armies grabbed whole swathes of China. This is the American army in Tiananmen Square, Peking, in 1900. Great cities like Shanghai were taken over and declared concessions, and foreigners lived a life of privilege and luxury amidst terrible poverty imposed on the Chinese. A resistance, known as the Boxer Rebellion, was put down with a savagery. This rape of China set the tone for how China was perceived in the West well into the 20th century. This is the distinguished historian Theodore H. White, an advisor to the White House, speaking in the 1960s.
Perhaps China is too vast to be governed by mercy. Yet if Chinese mind craves order, they must be brought to recognize they are the biggest factor in the world's disorder. And we must untangle the madness of their mind. The most difficult task in the world is to reach the minds of men who hate you.
What White was really complaining about was the loss of a China that the Imperial West could dominate, and the defeat of General Chiang Kai-shek, who with his famously powerful Christian wife, Mei Ling-sung, guarded America's interests in China. That is, until they were thrown out in 1949 by a communist revolution led by Mao Zedong.
Mao had beaten Chiang Kai-shek 3 times in huge battles involving millions of combatants. Mao was a winner in this contest from the early 1930s on, but we knew very little about it, and people don't understand that even today.
Shanghai hears the message clearly as foreign businessmen board up their shops. Go now, go quickly, for communism marches. Take what you can, but flee. In pell-mell haste, the Western powers evacuate the city they have built, for good and bad alike must leave. The businessmen come for profit, as well as missionaries come to heal, must say goodbye, as out the Yangtze steams the last of Western influence, and farewell to a century.
Even today, it's difficult to understand the paranoia ignited by Mao's revolution.
As we look at China on the map, we can see that China is the basic cause of all of our troubles in Asia.
I believe that for the sake of our safety, it is necessary to be prepared for the possibility of a Chinese missile attack on the United States.
One of the myths about Mao is that he was an implacable enemy of the capitalist West. Shanghai today is a prosperous international city, still run by the communists, at least in name. When I was last in China more than a generation ago, the loudest noise was the tinkling of bicycle bells. Mao had just died, the streets were dark, the universities were closed. The chaos of the Cultural Revolution had given way to a great silence. "We're exhausted," was the freest comment I heard. Coming back, the change is barely comprehensible. Here in Shanghai, the freedom bears no comparison. Yes, there are issues with human rights, especially the right to speak against the state and challenge its power. Since I was last here, millions of people have been lifted out of poverty, many of them into an entirely new middle class. This epic is still barely understood in the West, or should that be willfully misunderstood? The truth is that China has matched America at its own great game of capitalism, and that is unforgivable.